Hello, everyone. Welcome. If you are joining us, you are here for Startup Prize, and we have a great webinar today. Joining me today is Matt White, who will be popping up just momentarily. But before we get started, I do want to do a quick thank you to all of our sponsors. It is because of our sponsors that we're able to do these kind of things and do all the things that we do with y'all. So a big thank you to the Prize Foundation, Louisiana Economic Development. Startup Prize is also supported with generous support from the Anderson family, Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana, Business First Bank, Caddo Parish Commission, Caddo Management, Chaff and Associates, the City of Shreveport, Greater Bossier Economic Development Foundation, Heard McElroy and Vestal LLC, Kallenberg Phillips Family Investments, Heidi and Gregory Kallenberg, LSU Health Shreveport, North Louisiana Economic Partnership, and Oshner LSU Health Shreveport. Thank you to all these incredible sponsors. We appreciate you so much. And thank you for helping us do what we do. Couldn't do it without you. And without further ado, I would now like to bring up Matt White. Welcome. Welcome to the Startup
Hey, Melissa,
Webinar
how are you
Series.
doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for making the time today. I'm really excited to delve into this, and I think the timing couldn't be better.
Thank you.
But before we get started on all these, your critical path to profit, I'm wondering if you could give everyone a quick introduction, tell them a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm Matt White. I have kind of a consulting background before jumping into life sciences. So I spent approximately 15 years in management consulting, working with payers and providers. And one of the things I really noticed is that, you know, in my work was with new technologies, is that the life sciences organizations really do not understand very well how other people, the ones who use the products, the providers, and then the payers who pay for it operate. And so I've left there and went to a company called a BiotechExec, which is a placement company for executives in the life sciences industry. And what's unique about it is we focus on the very early stage to commercialization of those products into the patients who need them. I've meet some fantastic and phenomenal people. I said joke I'm almost the dumbest person in the room. What people have done in human, animal, plant health, you name it. As long as it has a regulatory pathway, we can potentially help provide the talent we need. I also do a little bit of work in Australia because there's some unique benefits of going over there, and then have some other activities going on. But thank you for having me. And I'm originally also from Louisiana myself, so I'm glad to see Startup Prize really trying to grow Louisiana because that's one of the big things I want to see in the future. I had my mother-in-law ask me, "What is a parish?" I was like, "Well, in Louisiana, that's the equivalent of county." So it made me laugh when you said Caddo Parish.
Oh yeah, I guess that's true. It doesn't even strike me, and I've lived in different places, and like it just I get like county throws me.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you for being here. And I know like you've done a lot of mentoring with us as well, which we love. So folks, if you're out there, if you're attending qualifier events, Matt is a wonderful resource. And like he said, I mean, regulatory path, reimbursement strategies, and building that team, especially strategies for building a team when you don't have a lot of revenue coming in. But we're going to change that today, right, Matt?
Exactly.
That's right. So let's get started. So maybe we can do it like, maybe we can go very, very broad. So like
Hmm.
thinking about a revenue strategy, right?
Yeah.
What, why is having this strategy so important for a company and more important, like for investors, like for people that are maybe looking to get money into their company?
Well, ultimately, your value is worth whatever revenues you can provide, and the cash flow that's generated from it is the key thing. And what's what's the
Good.
yeah, that's what I'm trying to do.
Ah, oh, sorry, everybody. Had some folks that fell off mute. No big deal. Please continue, Matt. Apologies.
No problem. So the most important thing is thinking about, ultimately people invest in companies with revenue potential. And so when you look at life sciences, it took me a long time to realize it, and I've learned it about last year was you're basically a zero coupon bond where you have, zero cash flow in, but you have a lot of cash flow out to get your product commercialized. But if you do it correctly, you have a market, whatever that market is, whether it's medical device, it's agricultural, it's biotech, it doesn't matter. But as long as you understand that market and where you're going to sell into, it's going to be important. And then healthcare really is, when you think about that side, it's much more focused on can I deliver a profitable service given the constraints of a very complex industry, whether it's fee for service, value-based care, it's cash basis, self-pay, you name it. There's a variety of different things you have to understand. And so putting on an investor's hat, you need to understand how you're going to make money when you get to that point to sell a product or service. Investors like that you're moving forward with your clinical trials, or you're building out your team, but you still need to have an idea of when are you going to actually start generating checks for the work you've produced.
Got it. So speaking of this generating checks, um, what are maybe some of those common misconceptions that founders have in the about revenue in the health and medical space? I know you've spoken a little, but maybe kind of maybe make them a little bit
Yeah.
clear. Kind of touched on some there.
I think we use the nice thing about healthcare and life sciences, there's a big number. In the US alone, it's about 4 trillion. Worldwide, it's probably about 20 trillion. US is an outlier relative to the other markets where we've kind of split out payer, provider, and life sciences into three different buckets that have to interact with each other. In other countries, such as in Europe or in Latin America, the payer and provider are the same one. But the point is the markets are large. So even if you get that, small fraction of a percent, there's still a big number there.
Hmm.
What I think people get in trouble with is that they don't understand that it's not, and especially in the US, it's very fragmented. In the US alone, there's over 5,000 health plans. Even though we say I have Cigna, well, there's so many sub-flavors of Cigna. You could have a commercial plan, you could have a Medicaid plan, you could have a Medicare plan, a Medicare Advantage, or a government plan or something else. And so all that, those things, those rules and regulations on what they pay for it, how I reimburse is going to be very different. Like you and I could go in for the same procedure and we both want the same product. One may
Hmm.
be reimbursed, the other may be not because it's not on their schedule to pay or scheduled benefits. Um, and I think people don't really understand that, those are very important things. So as a person who's looking into this market, you really need to understand your your value in those markets too, not just it's going to make people healthier, but I can tell you I've seen as working with hospitals, oh my device has a different notch on the end and it's going to reduce stay by 10%, but it's going to cost you $5,000 more for this notch. And a lot of people are going to be like, it's not worth the
Hmm.
money. So I'll just stick with the current product. So you got to really understand, do you have a market and what is there a reasonable way of getting reimbursed from those markets? Um, one thing I'll just say, the other misconception is that, there's other markets outside that have faster regulatory pathways that maybe make sense to start off with, or, don't only just focus on the US market. Your value can increase if you have a lot of sales in a bunch of different countries versus just one trying to get sales here in the US alone.
Got it. I like that. Well, kind of speaking strategies, right? Like, what are maybe some of the biggest mistakes you've seen, or kind of the
Um,
pitfalls for early stage?
I think there's some specific ones for healthcare and life sciences. in each category, but I would say the biggest one is not planning in advance. Everyone gets so focused on clearance, but that still is you're still a $0 revenue company. You got to think of commercialization. So, even if you're very early in your idea, having at least some way of how you're going to get reimbursed and commercialization plan is going to be important for you to help prepare your clinical trial design, your reimbursement, your sales model, etc. For instance, if it's going to take you a lot of time, it's going to take you a lot of time to go through the clinical trials, but at least getting some basic information at the starting and refining it as you go is going to be critical for you to sell into that market. So a good example is if you have a product that can keep people out of hospital faster, collecting that financial data to then when it comes time to sell is going to be a lot more impactful to payers and providers because they see, yeah, I might pay $200 more for this person, but I'm going to save, 10 hours or one day in
Mhm.
the in a healthcare facility. That's significant money, so I'd be comfortable paying for that. So you gotta show the value case down the road. Um, in terms of unique things around I would say in general for healthcare, the sales cycle is long. You know, it doesn't
Give
like
people like a rough idea, like a sales cycle for like, let's say, a hospital system.
it can be some are very fast, some are very slow, but in general, I would say it could be 9 months for a single product. And a lot of health systems have these things called value analysis committees, which they then evaluate and determine if the product is, and those people then have to get their approvals, and then there's a whole contracting thing. So you gotta look at multiple ways of managing the ability to say no, because if one person says no, you could be derailed and you spent 9 months on that whole
Wow.
process. Um, Internationally, it can be much faster. I get a good example is some countries accept US FDA stamp as an example. Like it's clear in the US. There's a lot of other countries in the world that will pay top dollar for that, and you can, outsource that to a sales provider who can just manage that for you, and you pay a commission for each sale. That's a great value proposition because you've increased your value. Companies can't say you're more into revenue versus not in revenue. And I think the other thing is that the thing that tells you is if it comes time to sell your company to a larger company, you can always say, look, I'm in three different countries making revenue. I get to deserve a premium versus you just buying me for the United States alone.
Hmm. It's an interesting thought. I like that. Yeah. I mean, like just to be able to diversify gives your company a little bit more value as well. Uh,
Exactly.
and also just a little, maybe a little bit more flexibility sometimes. Like if your revenue is decreasing in one area, maybe you're making up for it in another.
A good example is uh there's seasonality in certain diseases like flu. So, flu is going to be prevalent in the winter months here, but it's summer south of the equator in Australia and South Africa and Latin America. You know, have some you can get some sales there if you had a flu product while, as the seasons change, they go back to different things. So even sometimes seasonality is getting different geographies is important so you don't get all wound up into, one geography.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, like I think you and I were talking about all the pollen out right now. I think about like allergy season as well, like maybe something like that. Right?
Exactly. Well,
Okay.
you stay indoors.
I know, right? So, okay. Why don't we kind of get maybe a little bit more into those specific revenue models? I wonder if you could kind of like break down a couple of them, maybe what they entail. Maybe we could talk a little bit about advantages, disadvantages, things like that.
Yeah, so in general, I'm going to just say life sciences companies is really, for all intents and purposes, is a products-based approach. So I deliver a product, I get paid as a pass-through line. So, I get good example is a pharmaceutical company makes a drug, they distribute it through a service provider who then sells it to a hospital. I get a fee of that. I get a fee for selling that product. That's probably the most simplest way, as your products are used, consumed, revenue happens. In that, life science companies are also unique is that you may do a licensing agreement or a joint venture agreement where you say, I'm not going to focus on actual product itself. I'm going to give you the royalty, or I'm going to take a royalty off of licensing my technology. You manufacture, you distribute, and I get 5% off that. So if in the first example you may get $10 a pill, but in the next example you could get 50 cents on each pill because you're getting a royalty for every time someone else is selling your product.
Mhm.
That's a very viable strategy in life sciences. And joint ventures, commission based. You may say to another company, let you focus in on Southeast Asia and you keep what you sell, but then you pay me a fee as an example,
Mhm.
or I pay you a commission. There's a variety of different methods. When you get into the the provider healthcare world, a lot of it
Mhm.
is fee for service. It can also be value based. So let's say, you know, I'm going to give you service provider $1,000 to manage, 100 people. That could be, phone calls to keep people out of the hospital. Did you take your medicine? Or let me give you, make sure you're taking your insulin as an example. So within that the $1,000, if burn through it, you put it's all at your risk. So you need to manage that thousand as best as possible. Let's say you can come in at $900 in the end of cost, but you can keep maybe 90% of that $100 difference. So there's, a value-based component, or they may say, I'll pay you I may pay you $1,100 because you've reduced my expenses down the road so people are healthier, they're not going into ERs, and so you can track that performance as an example. So those are kind of value-based care where you're trying to do both a financial outcome tied to a clinical outcome. And then in terms of the digital side, so a lot of therapeutics, it can be software as a service, it can be on a per unit, per member per month, a variety of different revenue models. As you increase the number of people using your digital app, you may charge, a different rate, or you may get $1 per month for, su supporting those clinical outcomes. So there's a variety of different methods, but I would say at least have an idea of how you're going to sell and get revenue for your product or service at the start, not just come back and say the payer wants you to do value-based care, but you've never designed your product or service to be that way. It's going to be really hard to translate that at last minute.
Mhm. So let's kind of think about this in terms of like when, I mean, like if I'm hearing you, you should be thinking about it immediately. Like, what are those revenue streams? But as a early company, like when should you begin thinking about what those revenue streams are? How can you decide? Like, is there like maybe an order of operations? Is there an easier entry point to market?
I would say the biggest thing is really just in that discovery phase, the early
Mhm.
as you go through, science to clinical trial testing, you should be having meetings with, key opinion leaders, which are doctors or medical clinicians who are known experts in that field. So they could say like, yeah, this is a real need and here's the issue I'm having. You know, there's been no innovation in um foot care in 20 years. And, as a podiatrist, I'm seeing a lot of patients that we can't fix. And so
Mhm.
they're still going to be in pain for the rest of their life. But this device, is a redesign of how an ankle could work. that could reduce a lot of pain, and I would be all for that. Also, talking with payers and other potential acquirers earlier, like, yeah, you may not want to disclose everything, but kind of understand from the payers if you need a new code for this because it's completely different, that's going to be hard to, that may take a longer time, but if it's like, it can dovetail into a current code and it doesn't cost much more than your current reimbursement, that's great. That gives more validation that your product can be used pretty quickly.
Hmm.
Um, Sometimes I tell people like your idea may not, you may not be the one who commercializes in the end, or you may be the first 100. A lot of times the big health players, the Johnson and Johnsons of the world, the Mercks, the Zimmer Biomeds, they want to see the technology being utilized, maybe not at millions of units, but they want
Hmm.
to see it maybe hundreds or thousands of units. And that's when they're going to be the ones who are going to do the distribution and they'll acquire for an exit. So you may only be needed to get to, the first couple of sales and then exit, which is
Hmm.
fine. I will tell you this, no small company is going to be able to build a sales team like immediately. So sometimes it's just better to say, take the exit and be happy.
Hmm. Well, let's see. What are things, I guess the other thing I would say are like, what are things that maybe you could be tuning into now? I'm not asking this correctly, but I guess I'm just thinking like, are there like signs? Like, are there things you can be looking for? Are there like tells where maybe it makes a decision to tap into a market easier? Like, for example, if you were going to go overseas, what are things that might be part of that consideration or might lead you there? Is that
Um, a good example is a lot of countries really value high quality or healthcare and life sciences companies. They consider defining jobs, defining capabilities. So they sometimes roll out the red carpet for you that may be, you know, access to national reimbursers. It can be, if you're biotechnology and you need to do manufacturing, they have, partners that can help you do that. There's tax incentives, research and development credits that can help you, stretch your dollar a little further. I think, it never hurts to ask those questions. I think the other thing is there are experts around the world that know those markets very well. It may just make sense to you focus on the market, let's say if you're US based, focus on the US market, but you've identified a good partner who knows how to run the Japanese market, which is very different than the US market. Let them, you know, pay the commission, be happy when you sell a product and just focus back on your original market. Just make sure the product's delivered to Japan.
yeah, I mean, that was kind of my question is like, the US market is complicated enough, especially in the healthcare space. So, as you kind of are entering into these other markets, like how do you even begin to know what you're looking for? And it sounds like you're like, speak with someone who knows the market.
Yeah, also I think there's a lot of trade shows as you go through, as you look to a new market, there's always a trade show. I think earlier in the year, there was the Arab Health Network, which trade show in Middle East, and that represents 20 countries. Sometimes just going to those things can get you at least one or two contacts. Also, the healthcare and life sciences worlds, despite being big, or can be very small. So there's someone who knows in your network. It's also just maybe asking a conversation, reaching out to people just to get a first, who should I talk to, as an example.
Okay.
Because one thing I will say is, one thing I will say is that the timing is so much, you're sitting on time, and the longer you takes, if you can cut out just a few months, it can be, significant dollars to your bottom line.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Okay. So here's where we're heading next. So earlier, you spoke about sorry, let me check my notes.
No
But you
problem.
talked about, kind of balancing clearance versus commercialization or regulations versus revenue. As an early company, how should folks begin to think about balancing those 2? I mean, like, it sounds like they can be kind of happening in tandem, but what are those things that founders should be looking out for? Things they should be maybe considering? Um, how do how do we balance those?
I think obviously commercialization becomes much more important as you go from early to delivery or clearance of product in the life sciences. I would say commercialization for healthcare is really going to be a lot of state-driven actions. You know, don't assume you're going to be able to get into every state immediately. They have their own processes. You have to set up entities and deal with local markets. It's not just like you can set in for one national thing and you're good to go. It's a lot more complicated. I think the biggest thing you should be focused on is really trying to make sure you're balancing growth with certain milestones. Like I'm hitting on the commercialization side, but you're not, going to a point where you're going to spin things out of control. So it's okay if you go a little slower. I just would say just start thinking about it before you get to commercialization. I've seen too many companies that built the product, but the product is ugly and no one's going to buy it.
Well, I mean, like, could you maybe give I mean, you don't have to like name names or anything, but I mean, like, I think like maybe give a couple of those examples. Like, is it like someone's like push through, like they see a code and they're like, we could totally fit in that. And then like they get almost to development and it's like, no, y'all don't actually, this is not a code that you would fall under.
Yeah, I would say in the medical device world, it's a much pharmacology is a little bit more if it treats the therapeutic and it's if it treats the issue and it's a therapeutic, it'll probably be picked up fairly easy unless it's like, it's a reformulation of a drug that has a 1% improvement and everything else works fine. I see a lot more in medical devices is
Hmm.
that, this new innovative product is going to reduce surgery time, let's just say 30 minutes. But, if you're going to have to buy a bunch of capital on top of that to use the product when they don't have to have that capital today, it might be harder to sell. So it's kind of you really need to understand your end customer. Like, and it's not just the patient, it's the hospital system, it's the payer, because the payer may be the one who is going to direct or buy if certain products. So I'm just trying to say, don't just think of it always about the patient. Think about the other stakeholders because they're the ones who decide what's used on the patient.
Yes, that's true. I mean, like that is something in life sciences, health industry, there's a very the customer is there's more than one customer a lot of times.
Hmm.
So I think you're to your point, thinking about who your customer truly is, and what those advantages are to them. And just a quick reminder, we're kind of coming to the end of like questions with Matt. So if you have specific questions for Matt, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I will pass them along. We'll discuss and go through it. Um, but I wonder if before we go there, um, we could talk a little bit about like maybe what are those things that maybe as you're creating those pitch decks, as you're getting ready to be in front of investors, what are things that like one might make investors perk up and say, "Oh, okay, I see you're thinking through this and you're thinking about like revenue." And maybe what are things that might be like row, like you've we've missed a boat here somewhere.
Yeah, I would say everyone's going to have an opinion. Every investor has an opinion on a product or a service. I mean, they're going to come with their own, if you're in healthcare and life science, you come with your own biases. But what I would say my biggest biases are
Mhm.
is really um, the team. And I would say that is probably the biggest thing because, you know, I would say having the people who've known how to take a product from idea to through a clinical trial to a commercialization is a very unique skill set. And it's not, no one knows that very well unless you've done it multiple times and you've had success and exit. So I mean, I take a high value in the team. And if I
Mhm.
am interested in something and say it's an interesting product, but you need the right team, you need to, I would say, look at altering your background. The other part I would say with that is if if they're not willing to be flexible on their team, then they're probably not the right investment for me because I don't feel like they're going to be flexible enough to know when some regulatory body is going to tell them incorrect or they've burned cash because they messed up because the proverbial "I told you so"
Right.
happens.
Mhm.
Um, the other thing I would say is when I get is testing it out with actual end users. Like I was looking at a company earlier today for somebody. Was kind of the more and more I think about it, like I really didn't understand. I understand the issue or the need they're trying to solve,
Mhm.
but they were solving it with a group of people that I don't believe have that issue. So it's like the revenue model to me doesn't make sense. And so then I would have to spend more time talking with end users of that product or service to sell or understand if they're the right thing. So I always, if I'm going to interested in something, I always ask a key opinion leader or someone who's an expert in that subfield to like
Mhm.
validate it for me, even if it's like a conversation and a gut check, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely.
And then the third area I highlight that I think is kind of interesting is sometimes it's just people, this industry is small, it's people you know and trust. If they come up, if they have such a track record that, if they said like, hey, this is interesting, we could help them out here, I would just immediately trust them because of their expertise. They've been successful, they know what to do.
Mhm.
And that's to me a great way of optimizing and makes me feel more comfortable they're going to be a revenue generating company in the future.
Got it. All right. I'm opening it up, everybody. So here is your chance to get your questions in with Matt while folks are formulating their questions. I wonder if you could speak. I know we've talked about regulatory, but it's something that we deal so much with here at Startup Prize and a lot of these early health companies. I'd say the last thing maybe is what are those questions? Maybe like, kind of speaking about investors and talking about that. What are those questions maybe founders need to be prepared to answer in terms of like regulatory in terms of kind of that, I don't know, that balance between regulation and revenue. What should maybe
Yeah,
go ahead.
continue.
Oh, I was gonna say, is there any like questions people should explain, or maybe any maybe obstacles, pain points folks can expect, kind of balancing that.
It's kind of like building a home. You're going to have a contingency bucket because there's going to be a surprise along the way. Have the perfect if you have the perfect pathway, it's probably not going to happen. Like
That
for
sounds awesome,
instance,
though. Do you know? Do
I
you have that like blueprint behind you? You can share.
I mean, think about it this way, the world stopped when COVID happened. So, clinical trials that we're doing for certain things just kind of stopped. And so you had to like redesign everything. So I tell you is have some level of contingency, first of all. The second thing I would really focus on is don't be so rigid. Because sometimes if you're so rigid, you're gonna you might cause more time to get something done versus if you just kind of were a little bit more flexible. So I,
Rigid in
I,
terms of like a plan or path or
yeah, exactly.
steps
Or
in motion, like this has to happen before we can do this, or
yeah, and a great point. One of the questions is wondering about the impact of current U.S.
Mhm.
administration on startup processes, especially for those with needing FDA clearance, clinical trials, or Australia kind of international markets. I would say there's other markets that are really excited to have you. Australia, I have a lot of background in Australia. They have a very unique program that drives a lot of value quickly for companies. At half of the cost in early clinical trials, they do a good program to roll out, and it's accepted by FDA. So, I mean,
Yeah, I
there's other
recently
market.
about this in Houston. It was really interesting. And like the path is it's fast and it allows you to
It's
begin generating
you
and like
you
getting past
you
like the
can
trial stages
the
earlier.
data is accepted,
Hmm.
and that to me is a smart company because they're going to have to do clinical trials here in the US, great, but they're at least thinking, can I do a little bit away while I'm getting prepared because the regulatory process here is you need an IND enabling study to get, first in human data, and that takes a while. And if, the people that we thought who were going to evaluate these products are not there anymore, that's going to take even longer unless there's a
Hmm.
regulatory requirement. So I would say don't always look at other countries and areas that could potentially help reduce some of that critical path.
Yeah. And I mean, unfortunately, there's not a very clear picture moving forward. I mean, like it's still pretty murky. So
And
yes.
another example is in the payer world for providers. Sometimes there's a credentialing process which gets your providers or your services reimbursed. And that process, depending on the payer, can take between 60 and 8 months. I mean, it is all over the map, but sometimes certain markets are much faster. And I would say just going after those markets first, maybe just to get some revenue in the door. And then while
Mhm.
you're waiting on the others to check off everything, then you can do that. But there's a variety of different ways of reducing your risk by going to multiple markets.
Oh, look at this one. So years ago, we would start selling in Europe before US because it was relatively easy to go from ISO 13485 to CE mark. Is that still a viable strategy for medical devices? Thank you, David. That's a good question.
Potentially, and I don't know, I'm not a clinical regulatory expert, but I would say the jurisdictional requirements of other markets are a lot easier. You really need to get the right expert who knows that individual market, but I would say the answer is most likely.
Mm. And we've seen, I mean, even from Startup Prize, I know our FDA track winner, um, why am I forgetting her last name? Biosapien from 2022. She is now in the UAE, and Katya is having huge success in raising over there. Just because there's sometimes there's less competition, sometimes it's just a different area. But you know, there's other markets
Yeah.
out there, and you never know. Um, so I see. I was gonna
What
look.
other questions?
Any other questions, y'all? I mean, like I have my like we're heading out question, but I mean, like I'll let folks ask stuff that's a little bit more specific to them.
I would also say for prop shout out to Louisiana, but and flyover states. But I would say one of the nice things I've noticed is a lot of the states like Louisiana are trying to roll out the carpet for early stage companies, medical, because they see it's a big issue. I mean, one company I referred to look at Louisiana is because they're focused on Medicaid, and Louisiana as a percentage of patients has one of the highest Medicaid numbers. And I think people should look at not, I mean, you should look at California, Palo Alto, Silicon Valley and Cambridge, but there's a lot of other places that will roll out the red carpet for you if you make a phone call to them. So
Oh, yes.
some of those would be as great, if not better.
Right. And then like tons of incentives too. Uh,
Mhm.
but well, if we don't have any last questions, I think I will go out with this one. What is like maybe that one piece of advice you wish more early stage founders knew when it came to revenue strategy? Ooh, or actually, oh yeah, we'll get you a recording, Gianna. Sorry, I thought it was like, I'll let her go first. Okay, sorry, Gianna. Sorry, everyone. Here it is again, that final question. And I'll stick around for anyone that has questions about the competition, things like that. What is the one piece of advice, or maybe a couple, that you wish early stage founders had when it came to a revenue strategy?
Is being flexible with your critical path. I think people are there's like probably 5,000 things, but I feel like understanding the critical path is probably the most important thing. And I think you can
Mm.
do things in parallel than sequentially. I think the smart companies look at commercialization in parallel to clinical development and product development. So I would say don't try to do don't try to do things sequentially, try to do some things in parallel.
So maybe don't do everything at once. Don't do just one thing at a time, but like
Exactly.
have a couple
But
things working. I love it. Just be somewhere in the middle. It's like a Goldilocks.
but you need I would say it's important because a lot of that commercial feedback is helps reduce the clinical time trial design. It can reduce your product design. For instance, if you're being you're shipping this product in a gigantic box and in the end it's only this big,
Mhm.
and it's bulky. It's getting that feedback early can reduce your cost, but also one of the things to think about is if you change the box or labels, you have to update everything and then re-notify, and there's a variety of different things. So, getting feedback from the commercial standpoint can also save you on your product development too.
I love that. Benefits all around and money coming in. So
Hmm.
always good things. All right, everyone. Well, Matt, I want to thank you again for making the time to hang out with us. I love your loyalty to Louisiana, even though you're an expat. It's all right. I won't tell anyone. But we've really enjoyed. Thank you so much for coming on, for hanging out, for sharing your expertise. And I know we'll be seeing you in just a not even a month at our online qualifying event. So
Yeah,
we're
and
there.
I'm
Yeah,
like I
come
said,
hang,
I'm
sit with Matt.
excited about people going to prize port.
I love it. We've got everyone and we got them already. It's true. If y'all come for the in-person, it'll be a lot of fun. All right, Matt, are we going to do it? Are we going to do our Viva on the way out?
Be ready?
All right, 1, 2, 3. Viva la
Viva
Startup
Startup
Prize. It's
Prize!
a lot more awkward online, everybody. All right, thank you again for joining us. And